Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where people locked their doors at night. In this tiny Montana town, the streets rolled quiet after dusk, and neighbors still waved to one another from their porches. Folks here knew each other's kids by name, and the local diner served the same coffee to the same regulars, day after day. For the Monroe family, Willow Creek was more than home. It was a safe harbor. That belief, that sense of safety, is what made February 12, 2005 so devastating. That morning began with a sharp winter chill. Snow clung to the edges of the roads, packed down from weeks of cold weather. Hailey Monroe, the youngest of Linda and Robert's 3 children, stepped out of the Willow Creek Medical Clinic clutching a small envelope. Inside it was a black and white ultrasound photo, a blurry but unmistakable image of her unborn son. She'd only just turned 18, but she had already chosen a name, Ethan. Hailey wasn't just the family's youngest, she was the one who brought the most energy into the house. She'd been a star in the school's Future Farmers of America program, just like her older brother Mark before her. She could rebuild a carburetor with her dad in the shop out back, then spend the afternoon baking cookies with her mom. People said she had a knack for making everyone feel like they mattered. Her pregnancy hadn't been part of her plan, but once the shock faded, her family rallied behind her. Derek Holt, her former boyfriend and the baby's father, wasn't in the picture romantically anymore, but Hailey believed he deserved to know about his son. She told her mom she planned to drive to Helena that afternoon to show Derek the ultrasound picture. Derek had promised to meet her, along with his parents, at a small restaurant in the city. Linda remembered every detail of their conversation before Hailey left. Her daughter stood in the living room, still wearing her winter boots, cheeks flushed from the cold, coat unzipped. "I'll be back before dark, Mom," she said, hugging her tightly. "I love you." They were ordinary words, words any child might say before a short trip, but later, they would echo in Linda's mind in a way that made her chest ache. Hailey's plan seemed simple. The drive to Helena would take about 40 minutes if the roads were clear. The sky was pale and cloudless, though the weather report said snow was expected by evening. Linda even offered her own car in case Hailey's old sedan had trouble, but Hailey just laughed it off. "I won't be gone long," she said. "No need to switch cars." By early afternoon, Hailey had showered, done her makeup, and pulled her hair into soft waves that framed her face. She slipped the ultrasound picture into her purse and grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. Mark was out in the shop, tightening bolts on an old ATV. She popped her head in to tell him goodbye. Mark glanced up from his work, wiping his hands on a rag. "Tell Derek to keep his act together," he said, half joking. Hailey just rolled her eyes. "It's not like that," she replied. "I just want him to see his son." She got into her car and backed out of the driveway, tires crunching over frozen gravel. The hours that followed were uneventful for the rest of the Monroe family, at first. Linda started a pot roast for dinner, Robert took a short nap after a morning of work at the mill, and Mark stayed in the shop. The first hint of unease came around 6 o'clock when the phone rang. Mark picked it up. It was Derek. His voice was casual at first but shifted quickly. "Hey, is Hailey home yet?" Mark frowned. "No. Isn't she with you?" Derek explained that he'd had to cancel their meeting and had tried to call Hailey to tell her, but she never answered. Mark assumed she'd gone into town for something else, maybe met up with a friend. But when Linda heard that Derek hadn't seen her at all, the edge in her voice sharpened. By 7:30, Linda had tried Hailey's cell phone 3 times. Each call went to voicemail. At 8, she called Derek's mother, hoping maybe Hailey had stopped by their house anyway. But Derek's mother said she hadn't seen Hailey in weeks. That's when the knot in Linda's stomach turned to cold fear. Mark and Robert decided they couldn't sit and wait any longer. By 9 o'clock, they were in Robert's truck, driving through the back roads toward Helena. They retraced the route Hailey would have taken, scanning for any sign of her car. The snow was starting to fall, light at first, dusting the hood of the truck in white. When they reached the edge of town without spotting her, Mark suggested checking Harrison Park. It wasn't on the way to Helena, but Hailey had a habit of stopping there to feed the ducks or walk by the frozen lake. It was also a place she'd gone with Derek more than once. The park was nearly deserted. Street lamps threw weak circles of light over empty benches. As they pulled into the lot, Robert slowed the truck. Just ahead, under the faint orange glow of a lamp, sat a blue sedan. Mark recognized it instantly, Hailey's. His heart began to pound. He jumped out before the truck had fully stopped and ran to the driver's side. The window was down and the engine was still running. Inside, Hailey sat upright, seatbelt fastened, head tilted slightly downward. "Hailey," he shouted, yanking the door open. Her skin was pale, her eyes half closed. When he shook her shoulder, her head lolled to the side. That's when he saw it, the dark stain spreading across her sweater, the warmth of blood on his hand. Mark's voice cracked as he shouted for his father to call 911. In that moment, the world seemed to shrink to the sound of the engine idling, the hiss of the heater, and the snow tapping softly against the windshield. By the time first responders arrived, there was nothing they could do. The paramedics confirmed what Mark already knew. Hailey was gone. The ultrasound photo lay in her lap, as if she'd been looking at it in her final moments. That night, in the glare of police flashlights, the Monroe's quiet life fractured. 3 spent shell casings lay on the pavement by the driver's door. The shooter had stood close enough for Hailey to know who it was. There were no signs of a struggle, no stolen belongings. Whoever pulled the trigger hadn't come for money. They had come for her. As officers taped off the scene, snow began to cover the ground, softening the edges of the footprints around the car. The heater kept blowing inside the sedan until an officer reached in and switched it off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the cold. Back at the Monroe home, Linda sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, unable to call anyone. She kept hearing her daughter's voice from that afternoon, "I'll be back before dark, Mom." What she didn't know yet was that those words would become the first piece of a puzzle far darker than anyone in Willow Creek could imagine. And before it was over, the truth would reveal a betrayal that had been hiding in plain sight. When the sirens faded and the last patrol car pulled away from Harrison Park, Willow Creek no longer felt like the same town. Word spread faster than the snow that had begun to blanket the roads. By dawn, nearly everyone knew that Hailey Monroe was gone, and not in the way people meant when they said a young person had left town. The official call came to the Monroe house just after midnight. Linda answered, though she already knew. The tone of the officer's voice was careful, slow, like someone easing open a door they didn't want to walk through. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm sorry. We found Hailey in her car. She didn't make it." Linda didn't cry right away. She just sat at the kitchen table, the phone still in her hand, staring at the steam curling up from the cup of tea she'd made earlier but never touched. Mark stood behind her, gripping the back of her chair, his knuckles white. The scene at Harrison Park. Detectives began combing through every inch of Harrison Park that night. The snow made their work both easier and harder. Easier because fresh footprints stood out in sharp relief, harder because the falling flakes threatened to erase them. There were tracks leading up to the driver's side of Hailey's car, and more heading away toward the park's southern exit. They didn't appear rushed. Whoever had walked there wasn't running. Inside the car, the heater was still on, the radio tuned to a local country station. The driver's side window was fully rolled down, despite the temperature hovering just below freezing. On the passenger seat lay Hailey's purse, unopened. Her phone, wallet, and keys were all inside. It was immediately clear to investigators. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. 3 spent 9mm shell casings glinted faintly in the snow by the open window. The placement told a story. The shooter had been standing close, aiming down into the car. The angle suggested Hailey hadn't tried to shield herself or get away. She likely knew the person. Detective Ray Donnelly, leading the investigation, quietly noted that detail in his field book. In his experience, people only rolled down their window to strangers when they were forced to, or to someone they trusted. The timeline puzzle. By sunrise, detectives began piecing together Hailey's last known movements. According to her family, she'd left the house around 1 p.m. to drive to Helena. Derek Holt confirmed they'd arranged to meet, but said he canceled at the last minute due to other plans. He claimed he tried calling Hailey twice, then phoned the Monroe house when she didn't answer. It didn't add up neatly. If Derek had called the house early in the evening, why hadn't Hailey already been home by then? What happened in the hours between her leaving Willow Creek and her being found at the park? Detectives also learned that Harrison Park wasn't on the direct route to Helena. It was in the opposite direction, a 10-minute drive from the Monroe home. That meant Hailey had either changed her plans entirely or had been convinced to meet someone there. The diary. The break came not from the park or the car, but from Hailey's bedroom. While detectives cataloged her belongings, Linda quietly retrieved a spiral-bound notebook from the nightstand. She'd seen Hailey writing in it before, late at night, sometimes smiling, sometimes frowning. In the pages, there were notes about her pregnancy, her hopes for Ethan, and, most importantly, about a girl named Samantha, Sam Carter. Sam had been Hailey's close friend during high school. They'd grown up together, shared rides to school, and even dated boys from the same circle. But according to the diary, things changed when both girls became interested in Derek. Hailey wrote about how Sam seemed to grow colder after Hailey started dating him. The final blow to their friendship came when Derek and Hailey broke up, only for Sam to start seeing him almost immediately afterward. Now, with Hailey pregnant, Sam's name in the diary took on an edge. "She doesn't want me anywhere near him," one entry read. Another, written just weeks before Hailey's death: "Sam said some things today, things that scared me." Questioning Sam. Detectives brought Sam in for questioning the next afternoon. She sat in the interview room, arms folded, platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She didn't bother hiding her disdain when Hailey's name came up. "Yes, we were friends. Not anymore. We had our differences," Sam said. Her tone was flat, unbothered. She claimed she'd been at an employee party at the bank where she worked that evening, which co-workers confirmed. But Detective Donnelly noticed something. She didn't ask how Hailey had died. She didn't even ask why she was being questioned. A bank party was a decent alibi, but it didn't erase motive. And motive mattered. The twin factor. The next lead came from an unexpected angle: Sam's twin brother, Tyler Carter. Same age, same background, but unlike his sister, Tyler had a reputation for getting into trouble. More importantly, Tyler stood at 5 feet 10 inches, the exact height estimated for the shooter based on bullet trajectory analysis. Rumors swirled in town that Tyler had been asking around months earlier about ways to make a woman lose a baby. No one had taken him seriously at the time, chalking it up to crude talk. But in the light of Hailey's murder, those comments felt darker. When brought in for questioning, Tyler denied everything. He claimed he'd been at home the night of the murder. With no physical evidence linking him to the park, detectives had to let him go, for now. The red pickup. 3 days later, a witness came forward. She lived near the south end of Harrison Park and told detectives she'd seen a man jump the fence that night and run toward a red pickup truck idling at the curb. He got into the passenger seat and the truck sped away. In Willow Creek, red pickups weren't rare, but there was one in particular that caught attention: Derek Holtz. The ex-boyfriend, the father of Hailey's child, owned a red Chevrolet that matched the witness's description perfectly. Detectives seized the truck, combed through it for evidence, but came up empty-handed. No gun, no shell casings, no trace of gunshot residue. Derek denied being anywhere near the park that night. But now the investigation had a triangle: Hailey, Derek, and Sam, with Tyler hovering just outside the frame. Pressure builds. Detective Donnelly knew the case was balanced on the edge. With each day that passed, the snow buried more of the physical evidence, and memories in a small town had a way of shifting to protect familiar faces. He needed one of them to break. That break would come sooner than expected, but not before the investigation pulled the Monroe family deeper into the kind of truths no one in Willow Creek wanted to admit. Because in a town that's small, betrayal doesn't stay hidden forever. It lives next door. It shares coffee with you in the morning. And sometimes it rides in the same car. By the 4th day after Hailey's death, Harrison Park had become something of a shrine. People from Willow Creek left flowers, candles, even baby blankets folded neatly on the bench nearest where her car had been found. The sight of it was enough to make seasoned detectives pause. For Detective Ray Donnelly, returning to the park wasn't about grief, it was about the one thing he knew for certain. Crime scenes talk, but only if you're willing to listen for the quiet details. The snow that had fallen since the night of the murder was thin now, melting in patches under the winter sun. Ray walked slowly along the southern path, eyes scanning the ground. Most of the original footprints had been trampled by visitors or covered by drift, but here and there shapes still remained, slight impressions that seemed to move away from the parking lot rather than toward it. The witness revisited. The woman who had reported seeing the man jump the fence lived in a small clapboard house that backed right up to the park's south boundary. Ray had spoken to her briefly on the night she called in, but he knew sometimes witnesses remembered more after they'd had time to think. She answered the door bundled in a quilted robe, the smell of coffee drifting out. "You're back," she said. "Did you find him?" "Not yet," Ray replied. "That's why I'm here. I think you might remember more than you realized at first." She led him to her kitchen table and began recounting the moment in more detail. She'd been washing dishes when movement caught her eye through the window. A man came over the chain-link fence, boots catching on the metal just enough to make him stumble when he landed. He wasn't running like someone chasing a bus, she explained. It was quick but controlled, like he knew exactly where he was headed. She described the red pickup again, engine already running, headlights off. When the man got in the passenger side, the truck pulled away without hesitation. Ray asked if she saw the driver. She shook her head but added something new. The man who jumped the fence was tall, over 6 feet she guessed, and wearing a dark denim jacket over a hoodie. That fit neatly into the mental picture Ray had been building. Tyler Carter matched that description almost exactly. The pickup connection. By now, Derek Holt's red Chevrolet had been combed over twice. The crime lab in Helena had even dismantled the seats looking for trace evidence. Fibers, hairs, anything that might link the truck to the park. They found nothing. Ray didn't believe in coincidences, though. The red pickup sighting, Derek's canceled meeting, Tyler's rumored interest in solving problems for his sister. It was too much overlap. The question was motive. Derek had reason to want Hailey gone if he truly didn't want the baby. Sam had jealousy. Tyler had loyalty to his sister and possibly a taste for trouble. Breaking the pattern. That afternoon, Ray called Tyler back in, framing it as just a few follow-up questions. Tyler showed up in a wrinkled hoodie and jeans, slouched in the chair across from Ray. "We've got a witness who saw someone your height jumping the fence at Harrison Park that night," Ray said. "They described your jacket." Tyler snorted. "Lots of guys wear denim jackets." "Lots of guys aren't tied to two people with motive," Ray replied calmly. For the first time, Tyler's smirk faltered. He shifted in his seat, tapping his fingers on the armrest. Ray let the silence stretch, a tactic that often made people fill it with words they didn't mean to share. Finally, Tyler muttered, "I don't know what you think you've got, but you're barking up the wrong tree." It wasn't a confession, but it wasn't the easy denial Ray had expected either. Sam under pressure. While Tyler was in the station, another team visited Sam at the bank. They weren't there to arrest her. They were there to be seen. Public visits had a way of rattling suspects, especially in small towns where gossip traveled faster than official news. By closing time, Sam was calling the station herself, saying she was tired of the rumors and willing to talk again. Ray knew better than to rush. People who reached out like that often hadn't decided how much they were going to give away. When she finally came in, Sam leaned forward across the interview table, speaking low. "Look, I didn't have anything to do with pulling the trigger. But Derek, he's been saying for months he didn't want that kid. Said it would ruin his life." It was the first time she'd placed Derek directly in the circle of intent. But was it genuine truth, or just her angling to protect herself? Ray didn't care, not yet. What mattered was getting them to turn on each other. Following the fence line. Late that evening, Ray returned to Harrison Park with a flashlight. He traced the fence line from the witness's property toward the parking lot. Halfway along, he noticed something glinting in the dirt, a small, flattened piece of brass. He crouched, brushing away loose soil. It was another 9mm casing, weathered and dulled. The ballistics lab would have to confirm it, but Ray suspected it matched the three from beside Hailey's car. If so, it meant the shooter had ejected a round even before reaching her, maybe testing the weapon, maybe chambering it in anticipation. Either way, it painted a picture of intent. The circle tightens. By the end of the week, Ray had enough circumstantial evidence to make life uncomfortable for all three of them: Derek, Sam, and Tyler. He began interviewing their friends, colleagues, and neighbors, looking for contradictions. That's when another piece fell into place. A coworker of Tyler's casually mentioned that he'd been paid real good for some errand he ran for Derek earlier in the winter. The details were fuzzy, cash in an envelope, no receipt, but it was another thread tying them together. Ray knew they weren't there yet. In court, suspicion without proof was just smoke. He needed fire, something undeniable. And that fire would come, not from the suspects themselves, but from an overlooked corner of the town's quiet river. Because beneath its frozen surface lay the one piece of evidence that could blow the case wide open. The Cedar River cut through Willow Creek like a long, slow-moving scar. In summer, its banks were a place for fishing and cookouts. In winter, it turned into a sheet of black water framed by ice, silent except for the groan of shifting currents beneath. Detective Ray Donnelly had driven past it 100 times since Hailey Monroe's death, each time thinking about something Tyler Carter had said in passing during his second interview. "You'd never find anything in that river. It swallows things whole." It was one of those remarks that seemed offhand, almost harmless, except Tyler wasn't the type to talk about nature's poetry. Ray had filed it away in the back of his mind. And now, with a possible casing found near the park fence and more whispers about Tyler running errands for Derek Holt, the comment took on weight. The lead that wouldn't die. Ray wasn't alone in chasing that thread. One of his colleagues, Sergeant Anna Vega, had been following up with people who knew Derek. She'd found an old acquaintance who swore Derek had once bragged about dumping junk in the river to make sure no one ever saw it again. It wasn't much, but in an investigation where the truth lived in the smallest details, it was enough to put a search in motion. Ray called in a dive team from Helena. They arrived on a gray February morning, the air thick with frost, their breath misting in the cold. The divers moved methodically, cutting into the river's dark surface and disappearing below. Above, officers walked the banks, eyes scanning for anything that might surface. 6 hours in the cold. Hours passed. The cold began to seep through Ray's gloves. The divers came up periodically, shaking their heads. They found bottles, rusted cans, a broken fishing rod, but no gun. Ray knew this was the risk. Rivers don't give up secrets easily. The current could have carried a weapon miles downstream, wedged it under silt, or buried it beneath rocks. But around hour 6, one of the divers surfaced holding something wrapped in heavy plastic, sealed with electrical tape. The team worked quickly, placing it into an evidence container before peeling the layers back. Inside was a handgun, black, pitted slightly from water exposure, but intact. The serial number was scratched out. Ray didn't need the lab to tell him it could be the murder weapon. But he would wait for the ballistics to speak for sure. The science speaks. When the call came from the Helena crime lab, Ray was in his office, going over old interview notes. The match was confirmed. The 9mm handgun recovered from the Cedar River was the same weapon that had fired the bullets killing Hailey Monroe. That single piece of evidence shifted the investigation from theory to certainty. It wasn't just about motive anymore, it was about opportunity, access, and the fact that only a few people could have placed that gun in the river. Turning the heat up, Ray called Tyler Carter back in, this time with no pretense. The gun sat in a sealed evidence bag on the table between them. "We pulled this out of the Cedar River," Ray said, voice steady. "Ballistics matched it to the casings at Harrison Park." Tyler stared at it, jaw tightening. "Doesn't mean I put it there." Ray leaned forward. "Maybe not. But you sure knew it was there. And I think you know who used it." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock. Then Tyler exhaled, slow and heavy. "It wasn't my idea. I didn't even want it to go that far. But Derek, he said she had to be gone. He said if she kept the baby, his life was over." The chain of events. Piece by piece, Tyler laid out the story. Derek had approached him weeks before, asking if he still had connections to get a gun. Tyler didn't, but he managed to get one through a friend of a friend. The serial number was already scratched off. According to Tyler, Derek's plan was simple. Lure Hailey somewhere quiet, make it look like an isolated attack. Sam's role was to drive him there and back without anyone noticing. On the night of the murder, Derek had told Hailey he wanted to see the ultrasound photo in person. He suggested they meet at Harrison Park, knowing it was a place she felt safe. When she arrived, she rolled down the window, smiling, holding the photo in her lap. Tyler said Derek pulled the gun from under his jacket and fired 3 times without hesitation. Tyler claimed he wasn't at the car when it happened. He'd been standing near the fence, acting as lookout. When Derek ran back, they drove straight to the Cedar River. Derek wrapped the gun in plastic and tape before throwing it in from the bridge. One confession leads to another. With Tyler's statement in hand, Ray moved on to Sam. She tried to deny everything at first, but when told the gun had been found, her posture shifted. "I didn't know he was going to do it that night," she said. "I thought he just wanted to talk to her. But once we left the park, I knew. He was too calm." She admitted to being the driver, though she framed it as being caught in the middle between her brother and Derek. She also acknowledged that she had personal issues with Hailey, resentment that had grown since high school. Derek Holt confronted. When Derek was finally brought into the interview room, Ray didn't bother with small talk. He laid out the ballistics match, Tyler's confession, and Sam's statements. Derek sat back, arms crossed, a thin smile on his lips. "People will say anything to save themselves," he said. Ray knew Derek wouldn't confess outright, not yet. But with the weapon recovered and both accomplices tying him to the crime, the case was now strong enough to move forward. The Cedar River had given them exactly what they needed. The rest would play out in court. As Ray left the station that night, the river came back to mind, the same black water that had hidden the gun for weeks. In a way, it was like the town itself, calm on the surface but holding darker currents underneath. And those currents had finally pulled the truth to shore. The day after the Cedar River gave up its secret, the case against Derek Holt, Samantha Carter, and Tyler Carter shifted from a cold winter haze into sharp, prosecutable focus. The handgun had tied everything together, but the real unraveling began when the 3 of them realized they weren't dealing with rumor and suspicion anymore. This was evidence, tangible, irrefutable. Detective Ray Donnelly knew timing was critical. If you let suspects sit too long after a big break, they regain their footing, call lawyers, and align their stories. but hit them while they're still reeling and cracks appear. And when one person in a conspiracy starts talking, the rest often follow. Tyler Carter's breaking point. Tyler was the first called back in. He'd already admitted to supplying the gun, but now Ray wanted more. Dates, times, conversations, everything that could lock his statement into a clear timeline. The interview room was quiet except for the soft hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Tyler sat forward, elbows on the table, his denim jacket creasing under his weight. "You told me Derek didn't want the baby," Ray began. "But you left out something. What did he offer you?" Tyler hesitated, jaw working. $11,000, he said finally. Half up front, half after. The figure landed heavy in the room. Ray knew juries liked motives they could understand. Money was one of the clearest. Tyler went on to describe meeting Derek behind an old auto shop 2 weeks before the murder. The cash came in a plain envelope. No words about murder, not then, but plenty about solving the problem. Ray kept his tone even. "And Sam? How much did she know before that night?" Tyler's eyes dropped to the table. "Enough," he said. "She didn't pull the trigger, but she knew what was coming. She wanted Hailey gone as much as Derek did." Samantha Carter's shift. When Sam walked into the station later that day, she carried herself differently, less defiant, more guarded. She'd heard Tyler was talking. That alone was enough to make her nervous. Ray let her sit for a moment before speaking. "Tyler's been straight with us," he said. "He's owning his part. Now's your chance to do the same." She leaned back, arms crossed, but the stiffness in her posture betrayed her. "I didn't want her dead," Sam insisted. I didn't want her in our lives. Every time I saw her, it was like she was rubbing it in my face." Ray didn't interrupt. He'd learned that if you let people talk long enough, they often wander closer to the truth than they mean to. Sam admitted Derek had asked her to drive him to Harrison Park that night. "He said he just wanted to talk to her," she repeated. But then, after they left the park, she'd heard 3 sharp cracks from a distance, gunshots, though she hadn't wanted to believe it at the time. "When he came back to the truck," she said quietly, "he told me to drive. Didn't say why. Didn't have to." Derek Holt's denial. Of the 3, Derek was the hardest to read. When he entered the interview room, he wore the same calm smirk he'd had since day one, as if the entire investigation were a minor inconvenience. Ray laid the evidence on the table. The recovered handgun in its sealed bag, photos of the casings from the park, and signed statements from Tyler and Sam. "They're both pointing at you, Derek," Ray said. "You want to tell me why?" Derek shrugged. "People lie, especially when they're staring at prison time." But the edges of his composure were fraying. He shifted in his seat more often, asked for water twice in 20 minutes. When Ray mentioned the ultrasound photo found in Hailey's lap, something flickered across his face, a quick tightening of the jaw, gone as soon as it appeared. He never confessed, but Ray didn't need him to. The combination of physical evidence and 2 cooperating witnesses would speak loudly enough in court. The town reacts. In Willow Creek, the arrest of Derek Holt was like watching the ground crack open under the town's feet. 4 years, he'd been the charming high school quarterback, the guy everyone's parents trusted to drive their kids home after games. Sam had been the pretty, popular girl who worked the counter at the local bank. Tyler was quieter, but still, one of our own. Now their names were being read out on the evening news alongside words like conspiracy, homicide, and unborn child. At the park memorial, some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others muttered that they always knew something was off. In small towns, hindsight has a way of rewriting history. The charges. Prosecutors moved quickly. Tyler Carter was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and supplying a firearm in a felony. Sam Carter faced charges of aiding and abetting plus conspiracy. Derek Holt, at the center of it all, was charged with first-degree murder, murder of an unborn child, and tampering with evidence. For Linda Monroe, it was a hollow kind of justice. She attended the arraignment, sitting stiff-backed in the second row as the 3 of them were led in wearing orange jumpsuits. She didn't look away when Derek scanned the courtroom and spotted her. "He doesn't get to look at me like that," she said later. "Not after what he did." Preparing for trial. In the weeks leading up to the trial, more details surfaced. Friends of Sam testified that she'd complained about Hailey ruining everything. A former co-worker of Derek's remembered overhearing him say, "If she goes through with it, my life's over." The prosecution's case built itself like a web, every thread anchored to another until it formed a picture too complete to ignore. For Ray Donnelly, it was the culmination of weeks of long nights, false starts, and patient listening. But he knew the courtroom would be its own battlefield. Evidence could be challenged, witnesses could falter, and juries could surprise you. Still, with the river's secret now in the open and the web of lies slowly collapsing, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the day he first stood in the snow beside Hailey's car. Certainty. The truth was in hand. Now it was about making it stick. By the time the trial of Derek Holt, Samantha Carter, and Tyler Carter began, winter had loosened its grip on Willow Creek. The snow along Main Street had melted into gray slush, but the air in the small county courthouse still felt sharp, charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. For weeks, the townspeople had been waiting. The courtroom was packed on opening day, every bench filled, people standing in the back, even a few leaning in the doorway. To them, this wasn't just about the murder of Hailey Monroe and her unborn child. It was about trust broken in the deepest way, by people they had once waved to in the grocery store. The prosecution's opening. Prosecutor Elaine Harwood stepped forward first, her voice steady but carrying an edge. She began not with the night of the murder but with the morning, Hailey walking out of the clinic with that ultrasound photo, telling her mother she'd be home before dark. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harwood said, holding up a blown-up copy of the ultrasound, "this was the last picture Hailey ever took. She wanted to show it to the father of her child. Instead, she met the man who would take both of their lives." She laid out the web. Derek's motive to avoid fatherhood, Sam's jealousy, Tyler's role in obtaining the gun and acting as lookout. And then she promised the jury they would hear it from the mouths of the defendant's own friends and family. The defense pushback. Derek's attorney countered with a calm, calculated tone. He framed the state's case as built on the words of scared young people looking to save themselves. Sam's attorney painted her as a pawn caught between two men, her brother and her boyfriend, who made choices without her knowledge. Tyler's defense leaned on the claim that he never pulled the trigger, that his involvement stopped short of intent to kill. The jury, 12 men and women from across the county, listened without expression. Testimonies begin. The first witnesses were forensic experts. They walked the jury through the ballistics match between the gun pulled from the Cedar River and the casings found at Harrison Park. Photos of the evidence were displayed on a large monitor, cold, clinical images of brass shells, the recovered handgun, and the path the bullets had taken. Then came the emotional core. Linda Monroe took the stand. She spoke softly, at times pausing to gather herself, about the day Hailey died, the hug at the door, the promise to return, the call from the police. "She was my baby," Linda said, her voice breaking. "She was going to be a mother herself. And they took that from her." The courtroom was silent except for the faint scratch of pens on notepads. The witness who saw the truck. Next, the prosecution called the woman who had seen the man jump the fence at Harrison Park. From the witness stand, she pointed directly at Tyler Carter. "It was him," she said firmly. "Tall, wearing a denim jacket. Got into the passenger seat of a red truck and drove off." The defense tried to shake her certainty, asking about the lighting, the distance, the snow. But she didn't waver. The accomplice statements. The real blow came when Tyler and Sam's earlier statements were read into the record. Tyler's voice, captured on audio during interrogation, filled the room. Derek said she had to be gone. He said if she had the baby, his life was over. Sam's statement followed, admitting to driving Derek to and from the park. While she insisted she didn't know he would kill Hailey, her own words undermined her. "When we left, I heard the shots. I knew then." Derek on the stand. When Derek took the stand in his own defense, he denied everything. He claimed he never met Hailey that night, that Tyler and Sam were lying to cover their own actions. Harwood pressed him about the ultrasound photo in Hailey's lap, about his past comments to friends that he wasn't ready to be a dad. Derek shifted in his seat, his voice rising slightly. "That doesn't mean I killed her," he snapped. But his outburst didn't help. It only underlined the picture the prosecution was painting. A man cornered by responsibility, willing to make it disappear. Closing arguments. By the time closing arguments began, the story was clear. Harwood stood before the jury, her hands resting lightly on the rail. Hailey Monroe rolled down her window that night because she trusted the man standing there. She held out a photo of their child. And for that, she was shot 3 times. The defense attorneys urged the jury to remember reasonable doubt, to question the reliability of witnesses with something to gain. But the air in the courtroom felt heavy with the weight of what everyone had heard. The verdict. The jury deliberated for just over 6 hours. When they returned, the tension was a living thing in the room. Derek Holt, guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of murder of an unborn child, guilty of tampering with evidence. Samantha Carter, guilty of aiding and abetting murder, guilty of conspiracy. Tyler Carter, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of supplying a firearm in a felony. Linda Monroe sat perfectly still as the verdicts were read, her hands folded in her lap. Only when the judge dismissed the jury did she exhale, a sound somewhere between relief and sorrow. Sentencing. Weeks later, the sentences were handed down. Derek received 42 years in prison, eligible for parole after 16. Sam was given 20 years, Tyler 7. For the Monroe family, it wasn't justice in the purest sense. Nothing could bring Hailey and Ethan back. But it was accountability. As Linda left the courthouse, she paused on the steps, looking out at the small crowd gathered below. "This isn't the end," she said quietly. "It's just the part where we stop fighting for the truth and start fighting to live with it." The trial was over, but the ripples of Hailey Monroe's murder didn't stop at the courthouse doors. In a town the size of Willow Creek, nothing fades quietly. Every sentence handed down to Derek Holt, Samantha Carter, and Tyler Carter became another dividing line in the community, who still defended them, who felt justice had been done, and who couldn't bring themselves to speak of it at all. For Linda Monroe, the weeks after sentencing were a blur. The same routine she had followed for years, morning coffee, checking the weather, walking the short gravel drive to fetch the mail, now felt foreign, like she was acting out someone else's life. The house was quieter, too quiet. She still caught herself glancing toward Hailey's room, half expecting to hear the sound of her daughter's voice, or the faint hum of music through the closed door. A town still talking. At the diner on Main Street, where the counter stools had worn grooves from decades of elbows, the talk was still about the case. Some spoke in hushed tones, glancing at the door as if saying too much would bring trouble. Others were blunt, calling Derek a coward, Sam a snake, and Tyler too stupid to know better. Old friendships had frayed. Sam's former coworkers at the bank stopped inviting her family to community events. Tyler's old basketball coach, who once called him a kid with potential, quietly took down the framed team photo from the wall of the gym. And Derek, well, Derek had always been the golden boy. People who had trusted him to drive their kids home after football games now avoided making eye contact with his parents in the grocery store. Life behind bars. In prison, Derek kept to himself. He worked in the kitchen, said little to the other inmates, and avoided any mention of Willow Creek. Guards noted that he was polite, but there was a flatness to him, a refusal to engage with programs or visits. He turned down his first parole hearing, telling the board, "I know I don't deserve to walk out yet." Sam's time in prison was different. She enrolled in every program she could, anger management, vocational training, even legal aid courses. She wrote letters to her family, to old friends, and eventually to Linda Monroe. Most went unanswered. Linda read the first one, then folded it back into the envelope and placed it in a drawer. Tyler served his 7 years and was released quietly. He didn't return to Willow Creek. Some said he'd gone north to work in logging, others claimed he'd left the state entirely. For Linda, his absence was a relief. The idea of crossing paths with him in town was more than she could stomach. The Angels' Rest. Spring brought the dedication of Angels' Rest, a small memorial garden in Harrison Park. A curved stone bench sat beneath a newly planted maple tree, with 2 names etched into a bronze plaque, Hailey Monroe and Ethan Monroe. The town turned out for the ceremony. People brought flowers, baby toys, and handwritten notes. Linda spoke briefly, her voice steady despite the wind. "This is where we lost them. But now it's also where we can come to remember who they were, and what they should have had." Afterward, she stayed long after the crowd had gone, sitting on the bench, watching the branches sway. She traced the engraved letters with her fingertips and thought about all the moments Hailey had been denied. Her first steps as a mother, watching Ethan grow, even something as simple as another cup of coffee together on a winter morning. A change in the law. Hailey's case became part of a larger push in Montana to strengthen laws protecting unborn children. Linda and her husband Robert worked with state lawmakers to draft a bill recognizing the killing of a pregnant woman as 2 separate crimes. One for the mother, one for the unborn child. It passed the following year. Linda attended the signing, holding a framed photo of Hailey and the ultrasound image of Ethan. It was a bittersweet victory, but a victory nonetheless. Private grief, public memory. Life in Willow Creek never fully returned to normal. Some people tried to move on, burying the memory under daily routines. Others seemed unable to let go, repeating the details of the case to anyone who would listen, as if retelling it could somehow change the ending. For the Monroe family, healing was slow. There were days when Linda found herself in the park, not at the bench, but standing by the spot where Hailey's car had been that night. She never stayed long. Just enough to feel the cold air, to remember the sound of snow under her boots, and to acknowledge that the space was both sacred and haunted. The final word. Years later, a young reporter covering the anniversary of the case asked Linda if she believed justice had been served. She thought for a long moment before answering. "Justice isn't the same as getting your life back," she said. "It's just the closest thing we have. And even when you get it, the hole that's left doesn't close." As the sun dipped behind the hills, Linda walked back to her car. She drove past the diner, past the old high school, and finally past Harrison Park. The maple tree in Angel's Rest was taller now, its leaves whispering in the evening wind. Some wounds never heal. But in Willow Creek, where tragedy had once taken root, there was at least a place to remember, and to keep the promise that what happened to Hailey and Ethan would never be forgotten.